Okay, so a major error that people make, and I'll be honest, I'm actually guilty of this, with their dogs, is that when they say no, they don't apply a correction. You know, I do it simultaneously. Some people use no as a negative marker, whatever. I just go no and I give them a correction, simultaneous. The point is, no has to have teeth, and I'll explain why. This is so critical. If you say no and you give them, some of the time I'll correct, some of the time I'll say no, and gradually we can wean them toward verbal only. That's not how it works. What you're actually doing is you're using intermittent reinforcement, which is going to encourage the dog really to gamble and to take more chances, especially if they're a drivey dog or like kind of a stubborn dog, but especially these drivey dogs or hyper dogs. Prime example is Dewey. And look, I'm guilty of this, and I know why people do it. I caught myself the other day. I'm like, he's not as tight with his command structure as he should be, and that's the primary reason why. Because deep down, I'm actually kind of a softie, even though I'm sort of an asshole. Like, I don't really, I don't like Corral. Dewey's cute, he's funny. No, that is very dangerous with a dog like Dewey, and shame on me, okay? He needs a correction every time I say no. Every time he does something wrong. And eventually I won't have to correct or say no anymore. With him, it's going to take way more corrections in a much longer time because of his genetic makeup, who he is. And that's part of what's great about him. He's a working dog. It means he's going to be a shitload of work. He's just... And that has nothing to do with dominance. That's just him, who he is. And he just kind of wants to do what he wants to do. And he's got a lot of energy and a lot of drive. And if you have a dog like that and you're using intermittent reinforcement on the corrective end of things, you're creating a monster, potentially. And really what you're doing is you're creating a dog who is not going to listen. And I'll tell you, I'll just explain intermittent reinforcement as succinctly as possible, but that's how gambling addiction works. It's incredibly powerful, and you can use it in a lot of advanced training to really, really motivate dogs, because they don't know when the reward's coming. You do it on the positive reinforcement end of things. You don't reinforce all the time. You withhold the reward a ton, and then you give it to them. The master of this is his sporting dog guy, Bart Bellin. He uses a ton of negative reinforcement. He withholds the reward a lot, and then he gives it to them, and they don't know when. And that's how addiction works. All right, it's the anticipation of reward. That's how dopamine works. Is that dopamine? It's not about getting the reward. It's about the anticipation, the hunt. It's like, the yearning for it. And that's how gambling addiction, more than any other addiction, that's how gambling addiction works. They don't know when they're going to win. It's the thrill of it. It's like, And I think it's why it's one of the most powerful addictions. Now, if you take that whole paradigm and you flip it around and you apply it to the corrective end of things with dogs, you're doing the exact same thing in reverse. So what you're doing is they don't know when they're going to get a correction. So, and dogs, by the way, are natural gamblers because they're hunters. What's the rate of success in a hunt for most predators? It's pretty low. Right? So fuck it, I'm going to take a chance. Turkey on the table. I don't care. I'm going for it. 90% of the time, I'll get a correction, whether it's the e-collar or whatever collar. I'm going to get a little bite on the neck. I'll deal with it. It's worth the risk. 5% chance, I'm going for it. I don't care. It only happens, I might win. It's just like buying a lottery ticket for them. So you got to hyper consistency with the corrective end of things. Hyper consistency. I don't use a lot of intermittent reinforcement. I don't. I correct immediately. I praise immediately. So there's no ambiguity. It's black and white. This is sort of a more old school method. I'm not as into learning theory. I think it's useful, operant conditioning and all that stuff. I use it, just I'm not as into it, I guess, as a lot of other people are. I think it can be highly useful and more advanced stuff, mainly. And it's, by the way, it's probably because I don't use food rewards. I'll do it when I use toys. I do it a little bit with Dewey with a lot of stuff. When you get into more advanced stuff, I think it can be more useful. But it's not really useful for behavioral modification or basic obedience, I don't think. But that's on the positive end of things, okay? When it comes to correction, hyper consistency. Know the correction every single time. Otherwise, you're turning them into gambling addicts, except what they're gambling on is you just not following through. And this obviously impacts the relationship because they don't really take you seriously. Remember, dogs are social opportunists, okay? The dominance issue with dogs is real. It's complex, it's nuanced, and it's been deliberately misconstrued, and I could get into that for 30 minutes, so I'm going to kind of put it aside. But that's a real thing that impacts relationships with dogs, right? Social dominance it's part of how most animals actually organize themselves socially. But really, more than anything, domesticated dogs are social opportunists. Okay, and they're going to do what's in their best interest most of the time, and they're also going to try to take advantage of things as much as possible. Okay, and they're going to try to get away with things if they can. So don't turn them into gambling addicts. Okay, because they'll play you. They're great at it. It's their number one talent.